Ta-da! So today we're going to be taking you from beautiful Lake Tekapo all the way to the beautiful Southern Alps, or we'll see how far we'll be able to get. But most importantly, we're going to be talking about budgeting for your trip to New Zealand and telling you exactly how much does it cost to travel around New Zealand. So we'll begin by giving you a few pointers. We're going to answer this question in very short form. So if you don't want to waste any of your time, you just have to watch the first section of this video. But then after that, we're going to be diving a little deeper into the real cost of accommodations, of transportation, etc. So we're going to go section by section, and we'll wrap it up with some frequently asked questions, things that people always ask us about traveling in New Zealand. So without further ado, maybe a little bit of ado, let's get started.
So let's begin with let's just go over some sort of like the overall sort of daily cost you can expect in New Zealand. Before we get into all the individual costs, we just sort of give you a bit of a ballpark figure. But it is really important to sort of emphasize that the daily cost of traveling in New Zealand for people is vastly different depending on your style of travel, whether you are backpacking, traveling by bus, that sort of thing, or whether you are hiring a motorhome, doing bungee jumps every day. You know, people's costs can be very, very different. So because we often get this question, how much does it cost, for example, for a day, for a week, for 2 weeks, etc. We've just give you some ballpark figures that is kind of like a comfortable budget. It's still a budget, so you still need to, you know, actually plan your stuff quite well. Make sure that you are, you know, you're not going for the most expensive accommodations, all that sort of thing. You're going for like, you know, budget to mid-range costs, and this would be what your overall daily costs are. So, Robin, what is the daily cost of a trip to New Zealand?
All right. The one thing I'm going to be adding is that today all the prices that we're going to be talking about are going to be in Hobbit bucks, i.e. New Zealand dollars, right? So, you know, you will have to convert them. We just need a common currency for everybody. All right. So the approximate daily cost for a trip to New Zealand will be 420 Hobbit bucks. That includes car rental of about 110 New Zealand dollars per day, that includes fuel. Like I put car rental and fuel together. A private room in some like basic to medium kind of accommodation at $110. Food with a bit of a mix of self-catering, maybe for like breakfast or for you know, making some sandwiches for lunch, and a restaurant, so that'd be like 70 New Zealand dollars. Plus it's always hard to kind of estimate how much should you spend on activities, right? Because sometimes you're going to do some paid things, sometimes you're going to do some free things. But what I did, I estimated at 130 New Zealand dollars per day for activities, which allow you to do some like $300 or $400 activity in some days, and some days doing things much cheaper. So that's a total of 420 New Zealand dollars per day.
Cool. So how much, therefore, does it cost to travel New Zealand for 1 week?
All right, so extrapolating on that very same calculation, a week in New Zealand costs you around 2,940 New Zealand dollars.
And how much does
that's
it...
not not including flights, of course.
Yes. And how much does it cost to go to New Zealand for 2 weeks?
Okay, same thing. We continue with those extrapolations, and that's 5,880 New Zealand dollars for a 2 weeks trip to New Zealand, not including flight, of course.
And how about 3 weeks?
That's a lot of Hobbit bucks at this point. It's 8,820 New Zealand dollars for a 3 weeks trip to New Zealand, again, not including flight.
And finally, how much does it cost for a trip to New Zealand for 4 weeks, otherwise known as a month?
So for a month, consider yourself lucky if you can make it at around 11,760 New Zealand dollars per person for a 4-week trip to New Zealand, not including flight. All right, next up, we're going to be talking about the typical costs before you arrive to New Zealand. We're going to keep on breaking all the costs down for you. All right, so let's continue our coverage of the cost of traveling in New Zealand, and let's talk about the typical cost before you will arrive to New Zealand. So there are a few things to think about, you know, in terms of purchasing and preparation for your trip to New Zealand, from the essential kind of flight ticket to your optional travel insurance, etc. So let's begin by talking a little bit about the cost of flights in New Zealand.
Yeah.
To New Zealand.
To New Zealand, yeah. So this is obviously going to be so different for so many people. Like whether if you're coming from Australia, flights are going to be so much cheaper than if you're coming from all the way from Austria or the UK or France, you know. So usually you have to do at least one stopover. It's 2 long haul flights if you're coming all the way from Europe, which means that's quite a lot of money. Even from the US, Canada, those regions, Asia, that's still one long haul flight to get to New Zealand. So again, flight prices are pretty high, and different deals at different times of the year, of the week, of the day. So what we've done on nzpocketguide.com is we've got an article which is how to book a cheap flight to New Zealand, giving you a few tips of how you can shave some of the costs of your flight. But in terms of giving you guys a approximate figure of flights, it really would be impossible.
Well, it goes from $300 coming from Australia to $3,500 coming from like Estonia, for example.
Yes.
So here you go. From Estonia to Australia, you get a large difference of prices.
Yeah. So you have to do your own sort of research and finding some good deals there.
But when it comes to specific prices, there are some visas requirements when entering New Zealand, and those have specific costs.
Yeah, so before you come to New Zealand, you will either need to get yourself an NZETA and IVL, which are sort of paid together, or you will have to pay for a visitor visa, depending on your country of origin. There's different rules for different nationalities. But if you are one of those that needs to pay for the NZETA, that cost is either $17 if you're paying via the app, or $23 if you're paying via the website. IVL is a round number of 35 New Zealand dollars. And then for the visitor visa, depending on your country of origin, it is between 0 to 250 New Zealand dollars. But you can check out up-to-date prices for your country on the Immigration New Zealand website on their fee finder page.
All right, next up we have the cost of travel insurance for coming to New Zealand. So it's not mandatory to have a travel insurance when traveling to New Zealand, so it's up to you to make the personal choice of either coming covered or coming not covered. And those ranges between $20 per day to $60, $70, $80 and more per day, depending on how much you want covered, if you want your laptop to be covered, etc. So there is a wide range of options. The one thing that we're going to say is that there are some local insurances right here in New Zealand that tends to give you a better service if you need them while in New Zealand rather than your overseas insurance. So look into those options as well, and we do have some articles about that on NZ Pocket Guide. Next up, we have the cost of items to pack for New Zealand, and that again is a very personal choice, and that is the last time when I'm not going to give you a price, a specific price. Everything else in this video will have specific prices. But yeah, whatever you want to pack for coming to New Zealand, you may need to buy yourself a travel adapter. Those range from $5 to $25. You may want to buy yourself some insect repellents. They start at about $2.99, and they can go up to about $20 depending on which one you want to get, etc. So depending on what you choose to pack, and we obviously have many different videos about what to pack for New Zealand. So yeah, search our channel, you'll find plenty. Next up, we're going to be talking about the cost of transport in New Zealand, and we'll talk about all the different ways you can travel the country and how much it costs. So we're going to be talking about the different costs of transportation. So most of the hobbits that travel around New Zealand, travel on a little bit of a chariot, right? Pulled by a donkey. So all you need is a little bit of grass. Sadly, that's not really the case anymore, and so you need to pay for your own transportation. So let's go over the different ways you can travel around New Zealand. I'm pretty proud of myself. The different ways you can travel around New Zealand and what are their average costs.
Okay, let's start with car hire. So car hire, the daily cost per day can be anywhere between 30 to 150 New Zealand dollars. Of course, the reason that is so wide as a range is because, carrying a car in the low season in winter is significantly cheaper to hiring a car in the middle of summer, and obviously the type of vehicle that you rent. Next up, we've got two-berth camper van hire per day can be anywhere between 60 New Zealand dollars and 900 New Zealand dollars if you're getting a massive motorhome in the summer season. That will be up into those high prices. Petrol, obviously, this is fluctuating quite a lot, but at the moment it is definitely more than $2.50 per litre.
Which is a third of a gallon.
which is a third of a gallon.
About-ish.
But even like at the time of this video, it's around $2.80, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that price is fluctuating a lot. We do have a link to fuel prices that you can check out on the website off this page, which we have directly linked in the description below. For diesel, if you're hiring a motorhome, it might take diesel, and the prices there are over $2 per litre.
Which is a third of a gallon.
Yep.
Ish.
If you are hiring a vehicle that requires diesel, then you may have to pay a road user charge. This is an extra fee which can cost anywhere between $76 to $82 per 1,000 kilometers.
Exactly, which is 621 miles.
For if you're hiring a vehicle and dropping it off in a different location to where you picked it up, this one-way hire can cost anywhere between $0 to around 250 New Zealand dollars. For a 4-hour trip on the national coach bus, i.e. with Intercity, that can cost around 30 to 80 New Zealand dollars. For a hop-on, hop-off national bus pass, so basically a minimum of around 21 days around the country, that can cost between 1,600 to 2,000 New Zealand dollars. For a guided bus tour, so a fully guided tour that lasts approximately 10 days, that can be between 2,600 to 10,000 New Zealand dollars.
Which depends tremendously on the inclusions and the type of accommodation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You could that ranges from those backpacker 10-day tours to the luxury 10-day tours. So yeah, quite a large range there. If you are staying in New Zealand a while and want to buy a second-hand car that's quite old, about 15 years old plus, then that can be...
Hey, 15 is still young.
Yeah, not for a car. So that can be anywhere between 3,000 to 7,000 New Zealand dollars. If you want to buy a second-hand 2-berth camper van, again, that's pretty old, around 15 years old. That would be between 5,000 and 7,000. 7,000 New Zealand dollars.
5,000 to 17,000.
So sorry, I think I meant to say 7,000. I think that's a typo on the thing.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, if you
Well,
want...
the RV we bought was 19k.
Well, it wasn't a 2-berth.
Yeah, that's what bigger. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about a 2-berth
Yeah.
van. Cook Strait ferry crossing. So if you want to cross with your vehicle, well, more of a small vehicle and a driver one way, this is between 175 to 255 New Zealand dollars. If you want to take a domestic flight, a one-way domestic flight can cost anywhere between 80 New Zealand dollars, if you're getting a good deal, to 450 New Zealand dollars. Not such a great deal. If you're taking the national train, or national train trip, for instance, like the one between Auckland and Wellington, or the Transalpine, this is prices are starting from 240 New Zealand dollars at the moment. If you want to travel on a city bus, public bus fares, then per zone it's around 4 New Zealand dollars at the moment. Same for trains. This is cost per zone.
So in
again,
Auckland, if you want to cross from one one region to the other within Auckland, so let's say you're commuting for work, that's what we're talking about when we talk about zone, because the concept is different for a lot of people traveling around.
Yeah, so that would be for both train and bus, it would be around 4 New Zealand dollars per zone. If you're needing to take a taxi somewhere, the starting tariff is usually around $3, and then per kilometre it's about $3.10.
And 1 kilometre is a little over half a mile. All right, so next up we're going to be talking about the different cost of accommodation in New Zealand, but not before I remind you that all of those prices are estimated. You need to do some of your own research as well, but pretty easy to figure out with our help. There is a link in the description below. All right, so as we continue driving in the beautiful South Island of New Zealand, we're going to move on to the cost of accommodation when traveling in New Zealand. Laura, take it away. How many Hobbit bucks for a bed?
All right, let's start with the cheapest bed, which would be a dorm bed in a hostel. That can cost between 22 to 48 New Zealand dollars per night per person. If you want to have a double room to yourself, but perhaps having a shared bathroom in a hostel or holiday park, in other words, just some sort of budget accommodation, then that's between 80 to 110 New Zealand dollars. If you want to have a private double room with an ensuite bathroom, again, in more of a sort of budget accommodation like a hostel, motel, or holiday park, that's between 80 and 150 New Zealand dollars. If you want to have a self-contained unit in a motel, for instance, so that, in other words, that means having your own bathroom and kitchen facilities, then for a double room, that would be between 135 to 200 New Zealand dollars, or for a family room, that would be between 135 to 300 New Zealand dollars. If you want to stay in a hotel, going up in the sort of mid-range to even more luxurious accommodation, staying in a hotel room for the night would be between 80 to 350 New Zealand dollars for a double room, or 140 to 450 for a family room. If you want to have a family apartment or a holiday home to yourself per night, that would be 150 to 450 dollars. If you want to stay in a holiday park in a powered site, so if you're staying in a camper van and you if you need to plug up to electricity with your camper van, which you may need to do semi-regularly if you're getting a self-contained vehicle, for instance, then that would be between 22 to 40 New Zealand dollars for 2 adults, or that could be up to 50 to 95 New Zealand dollars for a family of 4. It's usually charged like for 2 people as a base, and then per person after that, so it can get quite expensive. It's not always as cheap as you would think. So if you want to stay in a cheaper campsite, so perhaps a campsite that is managed by the Department of Conservation, which otherwise known as the DOC, so anybody wanting to be in a sleep in a tent or travel in a camper van, that sort of thing, they really need to get like the Department of Conservation in their mind. This per person per night is either free to 20 New Zealand dollars per adult, and there's a different price for children. That's either free to 10 New Zealand dollars per child. Then finally, freedom camping. If you have a self-contained vehicle that is certified self-contained, then you can find places that you can camp for free in New Zealand.
But is it really free when we just talked about the fact that hiring that camper van already can cost up to $900 in summer in New Zealand?
Yeah, so obviously it's not as cheap as a lot of as it would seem, as you would think it would be.
Yeah.
You think you would be saving money because you've got your wheels and your accommodation sorted all in one price.
Yeah.
But yeah, that can actually work out more expensive very often compared to just getting a cheaper car hire, and staying in budget accommodations can be so much cheaper than actually doing the whole self-contained camper van thing.
And the one thing to keep in mind as well is that when you do self-contained camper van, you still regularly have to go to a holiday park or something like that, so you can refill the water, empty the grey and black water tanks and all those kind of things, right?
And charge up the electricity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So do be aware of all those kind of things. All right. So that wraps up the accommodation section. Next up, we're going to be talking about the cost of food in New Zealand, because everybody got to eat. Also, YouTube tend to like when you guys hit all the different buttons, such as like, subscribe, and put some comments down there. And that's the only way kind of YouTube kind of shows our video to other people. So it helps us, because the algorithm is a never satisfied monster that needs to be fed.
Yeah, that's very accurate.
Exactly.
And just one more reminder to you guys. Obviously, we're going through a lot of prices quite quickly, so we do have a list of all those prices in the link in the description below.
Yes, so everything is in written form for all of you. So if you do need... the algorithm killed 3 people. I like that. So that I said the stuff about algorithm. Boom. So there is a link below, so like that you have everything in written form. So if you feel like I talk too fast or my accent's too strong, or we're going through things a little too fast, there is always a written format of all of our videos in the description, so don't forget about that. Cool. All right, so next up, we're going to be talking about the cost of food in New Zealand. It's an essential factor into your budget, because everybody needs to be fed, especially hobbits traveling around New Zealand and do like a good feast.
11Cs don't come cheap.
Exactly, and 11Cs don't come. That's exactly what I was about to say. Oh my gosh, we're such a bunch of dogs. Laura, New Zealand restaurant prices. Let's just move on.
Sorry for ruining your joke. All right. Restaurant prices. Obviously, you're on holiday. You may want to eat out occasionally. We're not going to judge here. So, if you want to have, a main meal at a cafe restaurant, then that can be anywhere between 25 to 45 New Zealand dollars. If you want to keep it small with a sandwich from a cafe, that's between 6 to 8 New Zealand dollars.
Would you like to keep it small?
If you want a pint of beer, that could be between 8 to 11 New Zealand dollars. A small coffee is between $5 to $8, as I have found out in some places in Auckland recently. Fast food pizza, $9. And a Big Mac, $9.80. Woo!
When I arrived in New Zealand many moons ago, a Big Mac was $3.40. That stings. All right. Okay, so how about like shopping lists? So like some essential that you can get at the supermarket just to kind of, use throughout your trip that you can leave in your car or camper van.
Yeah, so starting off with a 1 litre sort of box or bottle of milk is about $2.50.
1 litre is 35 ounces.
Yep. A dozen eggs is around $7.50.
A dozen is 12.
1 kg of rice is around $2.20.
It's a little over £2, 1 kg.
For 500 grams of pasta, that's around $1.90.
It's a little over £1, 500 grams.
For a loaf of sliced bread, and I'm talking the real budget kind, it's $1.20.
The loaf of bread usually in New Zealand come between 800 grams to 1 kg. So same thing, it would be about between 1 to 2 pounds at most.
For 1 kg of cheese, that's between 10 and 11 New Zealand dollars.
1 kg is just a little over 2 pounds.
And for 90 grams of dry freeze coffee, just a small amount is between $2.90 and 13 New Zealand dollars,
Woo!
depending on the brand.
90 grams is about 3 ounce, something like that. All right, so moving on to fruit and vegetable prices. So if you want to stay healthy and get your, daily diet of fibers and vitamins, you may want to get yourself some fresh fruits from the local supermarket when traveling around New Zealand. Obviously, the price of fruit and vegetables vary widely across different locations in New Zealand and the different seasons. There is different season for tomatoes, for example. So if you're in summer, tomatoes are going to be cheap. If you're in winter, they're going to be very expensive, etc. Right? And all of the price we're going to be giving you right here are all 1 kg, which is 2.2 pounds exactly. So I'm not going to say it every time. It's always 1 kg and it's always 2.2 pounds.
All right, for a kg of apples, that's between 5 and 6 New Zealand dollars. For bananas, that's around $3.50. $3.50 New Zealand dollars, yeah. Tomatoes cost between 5 and 13 New Zealand dollars, depending on the season. Onions are usually around 3 New Zealand dollars, and then potatoes are around $3.50 New Zealand dollars.
What do Kiwi usually do with potatoes? Like, what's a traditional Hobbit meal to do with potatoes?
Well, of course, they'll either boil them, mash them, or stick them in a stew.
Indeed. All right, and finally, let's talk meat. So if you're a carnivore meat eater, again, we're going to be talking about 1 kg, which is 2.2 pounds.
Yeah, so for a kg of chicken breasts, that's between 15 and 16 New Zealand dollars. For beef mince, that's between 20 and 26 New Zealand dollars. For pork chops, that's between 17 and 23 New Zealand dollars. And then for lamb chops, that's between 20 and $26.
All right, so to wrap up this section, let's just remind you that you can always get something on special, so a little cheaper in some places, and you always will be stung a little bit more by smaller places where you can buy things. Let's say you're stuck on Stewart Island and there's only one small 4-square shop. Expect the prices to be premium, of course. So all of that are just indicative prices, and they can change a lot due to inflation, seasons, etc. So do take those prices with a grain of salt, but that's what you can currently find in New Zealand. Next up, we're going to be talking about the cost of tours, activities, and all the good things to do in New Zealand alike. Alright, so let's move on to the cost of activities and tours in New Zealand. So there are obviously a lot of free activities to do in New Zealand. There are some beautiful natural attractions, from beautiful Hooker Falls to the Fjorden National Park down in the South Island and everything in between. But there are also some stunning paid activities such as glacier heli hiking, or for the crazies out there, bungee jumping, or for the nerd out there going to visit Hobbiton. So here is kind of an idea of the main activities that you can do in New Zealand and what are the average costs, just so you can plan yourself your own activity budget for New Zealand.
All right, let's start with the easy one. Hiking trails, usually free.
Yeah,
Good thing
walk.
to do. Skydiving from 15,000 feet, which is kind of like the standard high amount you can do. That's between 330 New Zealand dollars to 520 New Zealand dollars. For a bungee jump, that's between 170 to 345 dollars. For whitewater rafting, for an adult, that's usually between 125 to 300 New Zealand dollars. For a child, that's usually between 90 to 120 dollars. For jet boating, that's usually between $100 and $280 for an adult, or around around 50 to 205 New Zealand dollars for a child. Robbie will take over because I'm running out of breath.
All right, so if you are planning on doing dolphin swimming in New Zealand, the cost will be between 220 to 250 New Zealand dollars per adult. If you are taking a child, usually the price is about the same, so expect to pay about $200. For whale watching, you will be paying $165 per adult and about $60 per child. So those are those big whale watching boats in Kaikoura. If you want to do a kayaking tour, and there's a lot of kayaking tours around New Zealand, expect to pay between 125 to 170 New Zealand dollars. Glacier hiking, so that's your heli hike and you know, like you're landing on the plane on the glacier and you kind of explore. Expect to pay between 650 and 750 Hobbit bucks. If you want to do a cruise in Milford, then do you want to? Yes, everybody does. So that's 110 to 145 New Zealand dollars per adult, and usually a child will be only about 50 Hobbit bucks. In Rotorua, if you want to go visit a geothermal park, which that's in the list of pretty much everybody when traveling, that ranges from 45 New Zealand dollars, so relatively cheap, to 19 New Zealand dollars per adult, and for child between 15 to 45 New Zealand dollars. If you want to do horse trekking, like the Army of Rohan, you can pay 75 New Zealand dollars to 220 New Zealand dollars, depending on the length of the horse trek and the inclusion as well, if food is included, etc. For canyoning, also same thing, depending on the length of that experience, between 130 to 500 New Zealand dollars. For a tour in Hobbiton, 120 New Zealand dollars per adult, and sometimes it's free for children.
For infants.
Yeah, for like the really, really small one, the one that don't even pass as a hobbit, and 60 for the one which are like hobbit size kids, is 60 New Zealand dollars. If you want to do caving, like those glowworm caving tours, it's between 180 to 675 New Zealand dollars. And if you want to do a great walk, basically you need to pay for staying in the department conservation huts. And so the price per night for those is between 25 to 110 New Zealand dollars. All right, next up, we're going to be talking about the frequently asked questions about the cost of traveling in New Zealand, the thing that we receive really often. But if we missed anything, make sure to put them in the comments right now so we can kind of cover that for you and give you all your answers. And even if you're watching a replay, we always go through the comments of the videos and we can give you some answers. All right, so let's do a quick FAQ, frequently asked questions about the cost of trip in New Zealand. So here at NZ Pocket Guide, we receive questions daily. We receive dozens of questions daily, hundreds a week. Seriously, you guys keep on asking us questions. So we've kind of compiled the most, common questions that we get from people planning their trip to New Zealand, and they're pretty generic usually. So let's begin with, is New Zealand expensive to visit, Laura?
New Zealand is considered moderately expensive to visit, quite similar to other Western countries. But of course, the costs do depend on your travel style. So obviously the cost of a trip for somebody who is taking the bus, staying in hostels, maybe doing a lot of hiking is going to be vastly different to somebody who is hiring a large motorhome and doing, say, glacier heli hiking and bungee jumping and skydiving, and eating out in restaurants. They're going to be very different costs. So yeah, it's expensive, but it depends on also your style of travel.
Okay, so how much does a New Zealand trip cost?
Okay, again, it depends on your style of travel.
I know, but I receive that by email really often.
Yeah. Okay, but just to give you some sort of approximate prices you can think about, and obviously, yeah, you just take them with, what am I going to say? Just,
Cost per day, if you really want a backpack and do it really on the cheap and not have enough money to do anything, that would be about $150 per day. If you want something more mid-range, plan about 420 New Zealand dollar per day, as we said earlier on in this video. And anything above $500 to $3,000 per day, that would be kind of your luxury kind of way to enjoy New Zealand, where you can enjoy high-end hotel, fine dining, and very exclusive experience. But that brings us to the next section. How much money do I need for a 2 weeks trip in New Zealand? I feel like everybody is coming to New Zealand for 2 weeks.
Yes,
so,
okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's go through the cost for your different travel styles. So for budget travelers, you could manage between 1,400 to 2,100 for 2 weeks if you're focusing on hostel stays, self-catering, and free to low-cost activities. For mid-range travelers, you might spend between 3,500 to 5,900 if you're enjoying more comfortable accommodations, some meals out, and some paid attractions and tours. And then finally, for luxury travelers, well, it could be around 7,000 up, depending on the level of luxury you're going for.
Okay, so do you have some ways of saving money while traveling in New Zealand, Laura?
Of course, there are many ways that you can save money while traveling in New Zealand. First of all, it could be the type of accommodation you choose, staying in hostels or camping or taking like budget cabins in holiday parks is going to be much cheaper than staying in hotels. Transportation, so renting a car, like an affordable sort of model of car, and staying in affordable accommodations usually works out cheaper than buying a self-contained camper van and having to spend money.
Renting a self-contained camper van.
Yes, renting, and then having to stay in holiday parks every 3 days or so, mixing it up with. Although you can camp for free in some areas, you will find that you will have to pay for some areas. So it usually ends up being more expensive, that latter option.
Speaking of transportation, by the way, our road trip is getting really great. I think we're going to get rained on.
Yes, it looks like
the weather has changed very quickly as we were just doing this video, so less than an hour.
A great example of those 4 seasons in a day that we always talk about.
All right, moving on to food.
Food. So cooking meals for yourself is a way to significantly reduce your travel budget compared to eating out all the time at cafes and restaurants. And then finally, activities. New Zealand is blessed with lots of amazing free attractions that you can see either from the roadside or you can take short or longer hikes too. There's really a lot of free experiences that are really worthwhile doing, so make sure that you plan plenty of those rather than planning a heap of paid activities.
Indeed, and we do have an article which is linked in the description below. So again, we have a full article in the description of this video that has everything we talked about in written form and more. And there is a lot of links within that article. So we do have an article about 20 different ways you can save money when traveling in New Zealand, so check this one out. Okay, so last question we get about budgeting for a trip to New Zealand is, do you need to tip when you travel to New Zealand? And can I save money on not tipping?
So tipping is not customary in New Zealand and it's really not expected. However, people in New Zealand do understand the concept of tipping, so if you do feel
they'll take your money.
They do feel like if you do feel like you've received excellent service and you feel like you want to tip, then by all means you can. It's just not expected, and all those high prices for everything means that at least the workers are being paid quite well here.
And speaking of tipping, if you feel like rewarding us for all the amazing tips that we're giving you all the time for planning your trip to New Zealand, including the making of nzpocketguide.com, which is New Zealand's largest travel guide, feel free to join us on Patreon. There is a link in the description below, and you'll unlock a lot of awesome perks, such as access to a secret Facebook group where we hang out all week long to answer all your questions and to interact with you guys, showing you behind the scenes and everything, as well as a weekly group call where you can come and ask us your question and genuinely interact with us every single week for an hour, which is a lot of fun. So feel free to consider that. Hit like and subscribe to reward all our hard work as well. And we'll see you in the next video.